it's a journey, not a race. So you just have to be patient and take a deep breath. You're selling something. It's FinOps, right? And you're trying to get somebody on board with it. So hopefully you have some good soft skills and you got some tricks up your sleeve.
Welcome to FinOps in Action. I'm your host, Alon Arvat. Each week, I'll sit down with FinOps experts to explore the toughest challenges between FinOps and engineering. This show is brought to you by Point 5, empowering teams to optimize cloud costs with deep detection and remediation tools that drive action. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of FinOps in Action. Today, I'm so excited to have our guest. I've been chasing her for a while, and finally, she was open to join the podcast and be there and share her insights. She actually has over 25 years of experience in IT and capacity management. She was the founder of the FinOps program and community at Shell, and she has FinOps on her Texas license plate. I'm happy to welcome Director of FinOps at UiPath, Tammy Burnitt. Tammy, how are you today?
I'm great, Alon. It's good to be here.
Good to have you. Tammy, you have so much experience in FinOps. Please share with us what is the one thing you got wrong when you started your FinOps career?
Oh my goodness. I have to think way back, right? It's been quite a few years ago, but I think maybe that's kind of a two-pronged answer. One, I think I was a little disenchanted by I thought this FinOps is this great thing and it's a great framework and it saves money and it helps people understand their spend. And I think I was met probably with more resistance than I would have anticipated originally when I set out to what I would call evangelize my stakeholder community. And I think in tandem with that was probably not starting a CCOE in terms of FinOps and what do people do? What is the charter? What are the inputs and outputs? Because if you know kind of what everybody's roles and responsibilities are and everybody's kind of rowing and pushing and pulling in the same direction, it's probably a lot easier to sell FinOps because people have a better understanding of what their persona is and what is being expected of them. Any tools that we would have available to them, what does the data look like? And so if I think back, many, many years ago when I started this journey, and also a lot's changed since then, the framework's changed. But I think for me in my personal journey, being so passionate and motivated about FinOps, I might be put the cart before the horse a little bit instead of kind of drawing out, I think, governance and policy, charter, a little bit of structure to be able to get people to go, oh, okay, I see what she's trying to do here. I think that would have helped probably a lot more.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. And it's actually so funny that you're sharing that you saw more resistance than you expected. When I tell people about, hey, FinOps and we help save money, they're like, oh, it's a no-brainer. Like everyone should be on top of it. And I'm curious, like, what are your insights about this resistance? Like, why do people in the organization are not so excited to do FinOps just as much as we do?
That's an interesting question, and I talk to my peers a lot in the FinOps community, and I think part of it is maybe not understanding or a lot of people think it's just about saving money, right? And I think if you look at FinOps, there's very much a technical aspect, and then there's the finance aspect, right? And typically, the personas that you're talking to, they'll either fall on one side of the fence, right? So if they're technical, they may not fully understand the finance side of FinOps, like I can't predict my spend. Well, you probably need budgets and forecasts to do that or anomaly detection. Or then if you talk to somebody on the finance side, I can't keep track of what's happening over here or projects or migrations or, the finance side might be frustrated because the numbers are all over the place and I can't predict and, all this unplanned spend is coming up for marketplace purchases. So I think it depends on, who you're talking to and you have to have a value statement. I think that's probably my new kind of catchphrase for FinOps is if people don't see the value in what you're doing, it will be very hard for them to want to get on board, right?
Yes.
I think that's your pay dirt, right? When you can get to that and I think that's when I saw people trying to turn the corner is what is the value? I always say, what's your elevator pitch if you get stuck with the CEO or the CFO in the elevator? How do you articulate, what do I do here? And how am I delivering value? And I think that transcends to a bunch of different careers and disciplines. But I think for FinOps per se, and I also, one of my best mentors in the FinOps community, Kim Ware from Target says, it needs to be FinOps plus something else. can't sometimes FinOps can't stand on itself alone. So if you can find something that you can attach to FinOps. So is it FinOps and AI or FinOps and, something else, right? Or security but FinOps, I feel like the more people I talk to and the more that I work in this industry and I work with people, sometimes people can't see the value unless you attach the framework to something else, to a philosophy or a product or a technology, right?
For sure. You actually said a few very, very fascinating things. The first thing that I'm also taking from what you said, on top of the insights you shared, is the fact that you should also identify the pain points of the stakeholders. Like this finance guy you talked about, he was having a really hard time reporting on these costs. He needed help. This engineer, he wants to do AI better, so he needs someone to help to guide him through how to use it. So, how do you do that? Like, how do you identify the pain point and actually lead a discussion around that?
At least for me, when I'm implementing FinOps or, I'm going to a new stakeholder, I try and do an assessment. So I'm very curious and I probe and I ask more questions probably than I do talk, and I just listen a lot. And so by probing and by really trying to understand, what's your wish list? Like, if you had a wish list, like, and then if they don't necessarily give me maybe some of the wishes that I think they need, then I'll start kind of planning some ideas. So kind of, like, well, so what I'm hearing is, and then I'll throw some things out there. But I think first you have to kind of do an assessment. I love to say a maturity assessment of where is everybody, or if they've got some of the capabilities and domains in place, trying to figure out how to fill in the blanks. But everybody, I think when you listen to people and you probe and you really try and understand what their pain points are, they really open up to you, and that's where you get all of your data, for your assessment, and then you can kind of come back and go, okay, like, here's where we need to start. And here are my recommendations. But you get so much information going out and talking to people and asking questions because those of us that have been in FinOps for a long time, we obviously know what we're doing, but FinOps looks different everywhere at different companies in different personas. Like it's a good framework, but you're going to have to modify that to what works in the role or the company or the technology where you are, right?
Well, Tammy, I love it. And I love it because what you just described is the best practices for sales. Like the ABC of sales is start with asking questions to
Hmm.
uncover pain points. And then you can start talking and offer your services or your products, etc. Do you feel that sometimes as a FinOps leader, you're also kind of a salesperson across the organization?
100%. That will definitely be a skill set that you need to have in your repertoire. The gift of gab, the gift of really being I think sales also you have to kind of be an empath, and you have to understand where people's pain points are, how long they've been having these pain points, but also you're trying to give them hope. Like, have no fear, like, we're gonna get through this together, right?
Yeah. And essentially be a leader because otherwise things won't move ahead, especially in FinOps.
Absolutely, and sometimes I think also along with that is, diplomacy skills, and you can't fit a square peg in a round hole. So just kind of taking a deep breath and saying, okay, and being able to look at a situation from multiple angles. Again, sales, you're selling something. It's FinOps, right? And you're trying to get somebody on board with it. So hopefully you have some good soft skills and you got some tricks up your sleeve. But really, um, it's a journey, not a race. So you just have to be patient and take a deep breath and, hopefully people will, you can get to that objective or that value statement really quickly after you've done your assessment and you can regroup and figure out what's the plan of action. So,
Very interesting. And Tammy, something I've been planning to ask you for a while. So at Shell, you founded the FinOps program and community. I wonder why you call it community. It's the first time I'm hearing this term in the context of the FinOps program. And what does it mean to run the FinOps community at the company?
well, the community of practice is exactly that. It's a group of, stakeholders or personas, if you will, that we all have a common goal, right? So again, we want to define that via a charter, but a community, to me, it means a bunch of different things. It's about education enablement. It's about lifting people up. It's about developing the collaborative muscle that we need, right, to further invoke either a framework or, ways of working within an organization. You can imagine the size of Shell, um, a community where it's people helping people, it's people celebrating successes. And you would be surprised when you celebrate people and you share their victories, whether it's a gamification or a podcast, how did you do that, or a newsletter? You would be surprised how it elevates and kind of accelerates, if you will, your objectives, right?
For sure. And it's absolutely amazing to see how the first challenge you encountered as a FinOps person, which is the resistance you got from people around you, was then translated into building a FinOps community. So moving from resistance and maybe conflict, you can say, to actually a community and a place where everyone can work together, achieve their goals together, and celebrate that.
Kind of tricky how we do that, right? We move from resistance to recognition. And everybody everybody loves recognition. And so I think just personas have different goals and objectives, right? Just like they have different personalities. And so I think that probably one of the most important things about being a FinOps director, a FinOps practitioner is figuring out what makes people tick. And once you can figure that out, everyone will fall in line. Everyone will be clamoring at the door to get on board. And, people aren't going to do something that they don't like or they don't find fun or they don't see value in. And that's your job is to figure out, as you said it previously, how to sell that, right?
Absolutely. And how do you drive this recognition and celebrating the success?
Oh my goodness. We give certificates, we give awards, we give gamification, so much recognition. When someone has a success, it's a teaching moment. So we used to do a podcast, 5-10 minutes. You know, how did you find this savings? And then how did you work across, multiple personas or organizations or delivery verticals to implement it? What would you have done differently? What were some of your learning lessons? And then that we use that recognition in it. Not only is it recognition, but it's also a teaching moment to somebody else that may be struggling with that very same thing, going, okay, I'm going to go implement that now in my landscape, or my enterprise. So,
And when you say podcast, you mean literally like sitting with the engineer and interviewing him about what he did?
yes, I mean, we didn't have like the sophisticated podcast setup like you have, but we would do a Teams recording and we would go back and forth, and that was one of the ways we celebrated people. The gamification, speaking engagements, come to our FinOps community call, and do a 4-page PowerPoint on what you did. I mean, you would be surprised. And then workshops. So once we got our education enablement done, and people would get their FinOps certification, I'm not teaching it anymore. I'm like, you guys, you got this. So empowering people to be able to perpetuate the success of the program, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. That's great. And I always recommend the opening podcasts. So if anyone here want to start a podcast in his organization, he's welcome to reach out to me or Tammy and ask about how we do that. Cool. And how do you distribute these podcasts or learnings across the engineer organization?
Well, similar to Slack, we had channels, and then we would post things on the channel, and then we would get people to join the channel, and then we would kind of, I don't remember what they were using, but we would count like how many people would access the podcast or access, the newer, maybe it was a playbook or a run book or something that we would put out there. And we kind of track the effectiveness, if you will, of the material, whether it was in video format or gamification or a newsletter or highlighting, or here's a blog. Let's go talk about a blog. So I think there are many facets of sharing, communicating, that reach people that learn differently, right? Some people love to listen to podcasts in the car. I'm that person. Or, if I'm riding somewhere and I have some extra time, I'll listen to a podcast. So I think not, whether some people learn through written, some people learn through Audible, but you're really trying to hit everybody in a different way to kind of get them in the fold, if you will.
For sure. And it's actually very fascinating. We've talked in this podcast many times about measurements and metrics, and it always goes to budget and cost and efficiency and savings. But you're saying something completely else. When you have your measurement, you should also measure engineering engagement. because that's part of the program to get engineers engaged, to get them to take action. So you have to measure how much you educate them, how much they engage with FinOps content, how much they aware of the FinOps program. Uh, do you have like measurements around that, like beyond the podcast? Is there anything else that you measured around engineering engagement?
For an engineer engagement, we measure, well, we give them KPIs. So in my past, we created scorecards. So we could kind of gauge, and I always say a little friendly competition is good. So we would have scorecards. And if one team was doing better than another team, we would invite them to come and tell how or why. Maybe their efficiency score or their coin metric, or whether it was RIs or how to optimize things. People love to share their successes, and I think be offering it in those different mediums, whether it's visual, recorded, read. It also we tried not to bog people down with meetings too. So we gave people the opportunity to participate and learn whatever was fit for purpose for them. And so I think they appreciated the fact that it wasn't just another meeting for the sake of having a meeting. We were really trying to reach them through a bunch of different avenues. And so our KPIs could vary from the number of certifications we had, the number of people that met their coin metric or their effective savings rate for their RIs, or um, who was using automation versus who wasn't. I mean, there was quite a bit of KPIs that we were measuring to do that. But what was interesting is the people, there's a little bit of friendly competition. So the people that weren't meeting their efficiency scores were like, hey, how do I get better? And then there was a whole channel of information. But I think when you say community, what I hear when I think of community and in the FinOps community that I'm in is people helping people. And I think once you get people involved, everybody is so willing and so happy to help people because they kind of remember where they were in their journey. And they're like, let me help you kind of get here.
Cool. So data-driven cloud efficiency. I think you might have just started a movement here, Tammy. And Tammy, we talked a bit about your experience at Shell, and I know that you recently started a new role at UiPath. And I'm sure many of our listeners either starting now a new role or will start new roles somewhere in the future. I wonder, what is your advice on how to get into a new company, and what are the first things you need to do?
Hmm. Well, I think there's a couple of answers there, a couple of recommendations. I would say figure out how they work. What are their ways of working? Because coming from a big organization to coming to a smaller organization, people's ways of working are different, right? And so figure out what the ways of working are, figure out do an assessment, right? We don't want to just come in there and say, this is how we do FinOps. We want to come in there and we want to recognize the hard work and the effort that's been put in. And then as we're doing that, we're kind of documenting from a maturity level what probably needs to be done. Get out there and meet everybody that you can. I think you do have to kind of have a sales mindset. You don't really want to be kind of introverted. You want to just get out there and say, how you doing? My name is Tammy Burnitt. Introduce yourself, touch as many people as you can, and make sure that they know who you are. And then slowly kind of start to roll out your assessment. But, figure out what your data is, figure out, what's in place, and then kind of make your recommendations. But I would say start slow because you can't just come at everybody and hit them over the head with everything, right? I would say this is a priority and this is why, and this is a second priority and this is why, and this is a third priority. But also, have those roles and recommendations. So if you come to people with recommendations, you got to show them what your plan is. So again, back to that CCOE, making sure you got those persona information and the roles and responsibilities there. And then what does it look like from a charter? If you're going to, chances are, if you're in a FinOps role, you're either a team of one or a team of two or three, and you can't bite off more than you can chew. And so figure out, another way you could probably effectively deliver, and I'm speaking from myself because a lot of FinOps people have to deliver through engineering, understand how DevOps works, epics, stories, story points, delivery. That's probably going to be your best friend in showing your momentum in FinOps and, how quickly people are either adopting things or maybe we don't have enough resources and backlogs are coming into play. But I think thinking of FinOps as a product, which in a larger company, maybe that's not as prevalent, but in some cases, yes, in some cases, no. And so, but first and foremost, what the ways of working are, do your assessment, And then, but you're not planning alone. You're gonna probably have some people that have to deliver through. And so that's where, you'll have your runway.
Awesome. And something that you shared with me in the past, and I think it can be also very relevant, is the fact that you should strive to have small wins very quickly. Do you have some ideas for small wins you can find when you go into a new FinOps role?
I mean, absolutely. I think the small wins are anything that you requires a minimum effort, but a big savings, right? So that would be example of a small win. So we talk a lot about shifting left. And what does that mean for FinOps? Well, that's moving FinOps at the onset of provisioning. So making sure you have some kind of controls out there that no matter what they deploy into the enterprise infrastructure, something's going to pick that up and save some money. And I'm talking about automating maybe your commitments, your RIs and your savings plans. There are tools out there that can autonomously automate that function. And then just knowing what tools are available to you and what the quick wins are. The quick wins are least amount of effort, most amount of savings. And they're out there, whether it's your RIs, maybe you can shut some machines off. But know the difference between what is real savings, like lowering the rate that you pay for something, and the difference between cost optimized savings, which is reducing the rate that you're paying for something by being more effective in use of the resources. But I would say those are quick wins. Yeah. And just, I'm on the AI work group, and we're actually authoring some papers right now on, because people may not know AI is so new, but what are the tools available to you? What are, we talked about a couple of them before we started the podcast today. So I think knowing what tools are available to you and where your quick wins are, again, I say it again, least amount of effort, biggest amount of savings.
Yes. And it is very interesting when you talked about the quick wins and some of the first thing you do. You talked a lot about cost optimization, and I think it's pretty agreed in the industry that FinOps is not about cost optimization, or not only about optimization. It's a lot about showing the business value. But I think something that you need to remember about cost optimization is that it helps you create measurable outcomes and measurable value that can then help you justify very easily to management why they need FinOps and why they also need to invest FinOps more than they invest today. And that's a way to get potentially more headcount or more budget for tooling, because uh, it is very easy to see the ROI on that. Uh, is that part of the benefit of the quick wins that you're talking about? Like, you know, justifying FinOps and also expanding FinOps over time?
Absolutely. I mean, your quick wins are, and you'll find this out really quickly, right? Because you'll have all of these initiatives, right? You'll have this backlog or all of these opportunities, and you know, if you can't really do FinOps with just one or two or three people, So I think, and also understanding with these new expanded scopes, you have quick wins, and we'll talk just about the cloud, right? But then it goes so far beyond the cloud. It goes into your SaaS. How are you doing there? You also have to manage your, if you have a SaaS product where you're supposed to be looking at your consumption, you don't want to go over there. So I think in terms of quick wins and expanding FinOps and showing the value of FinOps, you really have to understand the organization strategy as well. So what is their strategy in terms of their spend, whether it's production spend or non-production spend? You need to spend some time getting to know your finance people, getting to know your product people, and figure out what the company's strategy is. So then you can make sure that the plan that you're making, whether it's quick wins or even, I call them near term, short term, and long term priorities, that they align with the business's strategy. And so when you're making up your plan and you're trying to sell FinOps, you know, really what you're trying to do is say, hopefully you're trying to get to your margins. Hopefully you're trying to help people figure that out. Um, Everything that you do, hopefully, should be proving the value on the investment in cloud, whether that's the efficiency, right? Your coin metric on your consumption of your resources. How well are you doing in your RIs? What's your effective savings rate? Maybe you have some sustainability in there. But really, at the end of the day, hopefully you're helping them. And we haven't talked about this yet, but you mentioned it before, and I'll reiterate it. Budgets and forecasts and anomaly detection. You're going to have a person, maybe a CTO or CFO, and they're like, why is my spend all over the place? It's not predictable. People bypass that step or that capability a lot, and they just want to run to the cost optimization. It's probably the most missed domain and capability of FinOps that I see and I talk to other people about, right? And it's also the hardest one to implement because it's data driven. You just mentioned that, Alon. If you don't have your data in the right place, how are you going to build a forecast, budgets, or anomaly detection, right? So again, when you're doing that assessment and you're trying to prove the value of FinOps, we come in there as SMEs and we're like, all right, here's the opportunity. Here's how they're tied together. How would you like to proceed, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And then when you talk about anomaly detection, do you talk about any spike in cost, or you talk more specifically around, hey, there is now a jump in cost that take us off budget? Like, what do you think we should monitor?
My goodness, anomaly detection comes in so many forms, and I'm glad you're talking about this. It could be, I was talking to a friend in the industry the other day. It can come in the form of, I'm supposed to buy this RI, and this is a tool I was talking about. My provider that automates my RI says, "Hey, the pricing doesn't match what's on your pricing sheet." That's one anomaly, right? Um, pricing changes can be maybe when you switch to a EA to a Mac, for example, and maybe you're making sure that the old pricing, the new pricing kicks in. So there's a variety of anomalies, or hopefully your data is aggregated, which is very important at the hourly level. So if somebody just launches something out there, whether it's a LLM, you know, or something, an agent, and maybe it's ramping up really quickly, hopefully you're going to be able to catch that within a couple of hours instead of the following day, right? So I think anomalies come in different shapes and forms, and you definitely want to be on top of that. Whether it's you're using some of, this AI technology to figure it out, maybe it's machine learning or, but you got to have some thresholds and you got to start somewhere. It'll be a work in progress for sure, but anomalies will kill you. If you don't have if you don't have something in place and the suppliers aren't going to tell you, "Hey, we got that pricing wrong." You're usually the one bringing it to the suppliers. So, um, you know, and again, build versus buy. I can't stress that enough. Whatever tool you're talking about, whether we're talking about a CFM or a host of other tools, um, market standard where you can. I do know people that build these things, but they have a whole team of engineers to do it, the folks that aren't using the CFMs. So I think you know how to write a business case to kind of say, this is the way and this is what we need to be doing. That's definitely a skill set as well.
For sure. And basically, anomalies, like you just said, it's not only spike in usage. It can also be changes in pricing models, can be changes that the cloud provider did that you have zero control on, or it can be an RI or a saving plan that was just expired and created a change in the price. So you have to understand what caused the anomaly. And personally, I don't know if that's your experience as well, but my experience is that the biggest challenge around anomaly detection is actually the root cause analysis. Okay, so you know that something spiked. What happened? Is it spike in the price, in usage? What happened? And I think that's the hard part. And I think that's something that most tools miss today. How to help you also get to this bottom line root cause analysis, and it creates honestly a lot of burden on engineers because today they need to do it manually.
100%. I could not agree more. Your cost oscillations. So we take an anomaly detection is one of them, but hopefully you're explaining to your finance, your CTO or your CFO every month. Hopefully at the end of the month, I'm getting ready to go through this next week. You've got to start looking at your costs again and saying what increased and what decreased. Now that's not as granular level as an anomaly, but as a FinOps person, you should be reaching out to your engineers and understand why your costs are oscillating. Absolutely for anomalies. Hopefully you've got something that can tip you off. I'm looking at spend every day. It's the first thing I do when I get up in the morning. I drink my coffee and I'm like, are we on track? Right. But you do need a mechanism to kind of tip you off. And then, you kind of work from there. But as you said, you'll have the kind of spiky anomalies, and then you're going to have your anomalies every month. What went up, what went down, and why? And was it planned? Right.
Absolutely. Well, Tammy, I think I have like 10 more questions, like questions I prepared before the meeting, questions that came out as we talked, but I think it's really time to learn about you more personally. I think we already learned a lot from your rich experience in FinOps, but again, to me, it's always actually even more interesting to learn about the person himself. So share with us, first of all, where do you live today and how you got there?
I live in Houston, Texas today, and I actually was born and raised here. So my family is from the UK, and so I'm here. I would go back periodically to the UK, but I was born and mostly raised in Houston, Texas, from my early upbringing, and yeah, I was just here. I mean, I don't have a big story about how I got here, but yeah.
Okay, no, that's great. Growing up, living where you grew up, it's great. And typically also means that you're close to your family or some of your family, which is also awesome. I personally live like 5 minutes walk from my sister, and that's absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. Especially when you need backup for kids or stuff like that. So I'm all in for that. And you basically was able to take over the FinOps car license plate in Texas.
Yes, I think I'm one of like I am all in. I am drinking the Kool-Aid. I think I've had it now for about 3 years or so, and I think I'm only one of like 4 or 5 in the US. I think there's one in Utah, and there's one somewhere else, but there's like 3 or 4 of us. Yeah.
Yeah, I should have gotten the New Jersey one when I lived in New Jersey.
Oh yes, yes.
Cool. Is there a story behind it? Like, how did you make a decision to buy the license plate?
I think I was like, well, wouldn't it be cool, to put something on my car that I'm just super passionate about, and I think I was in transition, was buying I always buy cars, like, pre-owned, but I was like, "I wonder if I can," and I was typing in all the different variations, and I was like, "Oh, look, no one has this one," right? And I thought, "What is passionate to me that I would like to put on the back of my car?" So and one time, I was stopped, and somebody was honking, and they were like, "That's a really cool license plate," and I was like, "Wow, somebody actually knows what it means," right? Because most people don't. So
Everyone knows what FinOps is and everyone cares about FinOps, right?
we hope. We hope.
There we go. Well, that's the goal. That's the goal.
Yeah,
And one day we'll get there. One day we'll get there.
absolutely.
And and I have to ask about all the signed footballs behind you. Like, are they yours? And who signed them?
Those are my fiance's footballs, and they are like Houston Texans or Minnesota Vikings. He's from Iowa, so he's a big Minnesota fan. I'm actually sitting at his desk today, but those are all of his little signed footballs and helmets, and so he is a big football fanatic. So yeah,
Okay. You like football?
I love football. I mean, again, I grew up with rugby and soccer, but
Mm.
I like American football. It's nice.
Yeah. Yeah. I prefer soccer, honestly, but American football is definitely very
Mhm.
interesting as well.
It is.
And tell me, do you have any book or movie you'd like to recommend us?
So I have been reading a couple of books. I put them down because I was trying to finish my AI certification, but one I recommended this to the women in FinOps, and it's called Be the Unicorn. And I oftentimes try and read books about leadership or just, in general, like what's trending, in corporate America. And this particular book is about data-driven habits. And so I kind of like the title. I was like, it looked cute. And then when I started, reading the intro and the book jacket, I was like, "Oh, this is interesting." And so it does talk about these different categories of data-driven habits and like being prepared, being purpose-driven, being productive, being curious, self-aware. Some of these are like soft skills, some of these are just, facets of your professional, repertoire that you would want to enhance and then anticipate. So when I look at that last one, I'm like, I feel like that's one that I honed really well in my previous life. At Shell, I feel like I my boss was always like, "You never ask a question without knowing what the answer is or then anticipating what the next question you're gonna get asked is." And so I feel like that's one that I am very, keen. I keenly developed that skill, and so I'm always just looking for ways to where I can kinda sharpen my presence and my performance and my execution in terms of FinOps, and I feel like if I'm constantly developing or like I got my AI FinOps AI last week, I think you're always gonna be learning, right?
For sure. And Tammy, you seem like a very intentional person in general. I wonder what do you like to do when you're not so intentional and you just want to do something for fun?
my gosh. Well, I mean, I love antiquing. I used to be in a home building business, believe it or not. And so I did a lot of interior design. I still do for some of my friends. I just finished remodeling my home. I like to garden. Just kind of quiet moments. Just that's kind of my woo-saw is just, I think I kind of lean into my creative side. I'm so technical and so data driven and go, go, go in my day life. Outside of that, I want to kind of lean into that creative side and really kind of explore the slower pace, shall we say.
We should all look for some slower pace moments and some quiet because, these phones are driving us crazy.
Right? They are driving us crazy.
We need to find ways to stay away, disconnect a little bit. And honestly, that's a lot of inspiration for me because I also need to do it a lot more.
So true.
Tammy, thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. I'm absolutely positive that our listeners would like to reach out and ask questions. What is the best way to reach out for you?
They can reach out to me on LinkedIn. They can reach out if you're in the FinOps Slack, send me a DM. One of those ways.
Awesome. And I'm taking with me a lot of insights. But one of the key ones that I particularly liked is that FinOps is also a sales position,
It is.
and you should implement sales methodologies like discovery questions, mapping out pain points, doing this assessment you talked about when you start a new role, for example, and only then start to act. Okay, don't rush to it.
No, don't rush to it. But I think also, and I'll leave everyone with this, figure out what your non-negotiables are and what are your minimum table stakes. Because when you go in there and use that terminology, those are pretty strong words. And so you have to know what is the bare minimum that you can do to deliver this program. And if you don't know, like I said, reach me on chat or LinkedIn or whatever. But there's a minimum level of which you can go in and do FinOps. And that's what I call table stakes. And I think some people are afraid to we were talking about it before we started the podcast. Like you got to be able to say, hey, this is in the way. And that's okay. But you know that as a subject matter expert, what will and will not work. So say, figure out what your non-negotiables are and stand behind that. Right.
And Tammy, thank you for offering your help, sharing your insights, and generally just giving me a lot of fun time talking to you. It was really awesome. Thank you for joining us. I would also like to thank our audience for joining us once again. Again, tell your friends about the podcast like you do every time. This time is not different. We want to expand the reach, make sure more people are listening to the podcast. Tammy, thank you again. This has been another fun, exciting, interesting, fascinating, insightful episode of FinOps in Action. See you next time.
That wraps up another episode of FinOps in Action. Thank you for joining. For show notes and more, please visit finopsinaction.com. This show is brought to you by Point 5, empowering teams to optimize cloud costs with tip detection and remediation tools that drive action.